Hello and welcome to For Flying Out Loud, a podcast that aims to inspire, empower and help all of our listeners to dream bigger. My name is Andrew Neofitu and I'm super happy to welcome you to another inspirational episode of the podcast. Over the years, just like many other pilots and av geeks out there, I've been lucky enough to watch some of the world's finest pilots at air shows, pushing their aircraft to the limit and wowing the crowds. In 2024, I took my wife to the Royal International Air Tattoo, RIAT, at RAF Fairford, with one sole mission: to watch the aircraft that I once flew fly for what might be one of the last times on the air show scene. As cool as the Harrier was, amongst all of the fury and noise of the fighter jets appeared two helicopters, looking menacing against the dark skies that had formed the backdrop. As I watched them, they suddenly swooped vertically downwards, mere feet away from each other's spinning rotor blades. It was absolutely epic. This episode of the For Flying Out Loud podcast is brought to you by Flight School Wingman, expert support to pass your airline cadetship, flight school or other pilot selection process. 2025 sees the launch of Flight School Wingman's new Wingman Academy, featuring online learning with in-depth videos, downloadable training aids and much, much more. Flight School Wingman offers the most comprehensive competency pilot selection development anywhere in the world, and we'd be proud to help you find your dream job on the flight deck. Learn more by visiting flightschoolwingman.com. They are two serving members of the Royal Navy, both serving as Fleet Air Arm pilots on the Wildcat Helicopter. In 2024, these two pilots embarked upon a challenging, but as you'll learn, extremely rewarding journey to relaunch the display of the Wildcat Helicopter in an exhilarating pairs display season. Unlike most other display teams, the job of these isn't to display for the public, it's to teach the next generation of aviators how to fly and fight the Wildcat Helicopter. 2024 also saw the team awarded the Steedman Sword at RIAT for the best British display team, beating the Red Arrows, Typhoon and Chinook Display teams of the Royal Air Force, the first time that this had been won since the predecessors to the Black Cats, the Lynx pair, in 2003. Today, it's a great pleasure to welcome Lieutenants Michael Vivian and Scott Sunderland to the For Flying Out Loud podcast. Gents, really great to see you. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us, for Andrew. Looking forward to having three waffus in a room to spin some dits, hopefully.
Yeah, well, as we've just seen, we were talking about how things can go wrong. Three waffus in a room, what could possibly go wrong? This has been about my third attempt at recording the intro, at least, and you guys have had a sneak peek in the back. Scotty, welcome to you as well, mate. Good to see you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us, Andrew.
Yeah, excellent. So let's kick off with a little bit of sort of background. I want to start with the nicknames you two guys have got, because they're probably the least thought out nicknames we've ever had. We've got Michael Vivian, Viv, and Scott Sunderland, Scotty. Is that it?
Yeah. To be honest, Andrew, I've got a bit of a complex about this. I've always wanted a nickname, and I think, as with the military, if you really want something like that, they'll just never give you one. So,
okay,
Scott is about as good as it got.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it makes it easy to remember. And I've only got 3 letters on a name badge, so I think I get them a little bit cheaper. I don't have to put any more letters on there, so it makes it a bit easier.
True enough. Well, maybe we'll get some comments that we could think of some nicknames for you by the end of this podcast that might be a bit more unusual. I think in the US, I was chatting to, on the last episode, a really cool guy called Dan Robinson from Red 6AR. And he said in the US, they have a sort of a naming ceremony. You know, there's a whole sort of get together, the whole squadron gets together, and there's this big process of thinking of somebody's nickname. It doesn't really happen like that in the UK, does it?
No, it's a bit more understated. It's normally, particularly in the Navy world, kind of you ordered your wings, and here's your assignment order to your next deployment. Off you go. You're joining HMS Flip Flop somewhere around the world to go and get it done somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. No beach volleyball, nothing like that. No playing pianos and bars.
You get that a few years in, yeah.
Guys, let's start with a bit of background to each. If you could both sort of summarise where you first sort of got interested in aviation, a bit of a journey, because there'll be a lot of the listeners out there that are, desperately wanting to become military pilots or maybe commercial pilots. Everyone's got a story and a bit of a journey. So Viv, perhaps sort of kick off with you and let us know a little bit about your background, how you managed to sort of come to be a Wildcat helicopter pilot.
So I was one of these quite fortunate people that knew what they wanted to do from a really young age. I came from a military background and a military flying background. So my father was a Tornado F3 pilot and Canberra pilot before that. And I know yourself and Dan had a bit of banter about F3 versus Sea Harrier. So the less said on that, probably the better. But I remember my really early days. One of my earliest memories is being at a family's day at RAF Coningsby and kind of marshalling the jet that my father was going out to fly for the kind of roll demo, if you will, for the family's day. Really, really young memory. So even from back then, after wanting to be, I think, a train driver and a dustbin lorry driver, that my mum tells me, it was like, right, that's it now. I'm pretty focused on this. And then kind of spent kind of the early years of my life kind of thinking about that. And then unfortunately, when I was about 6.5, my father was killed in an accident in the F3. And that really that was it then. All decisions were made. This is what I'm going to focus on. And the way the military looked after us in that immediate aftermath and onward, even for the next kind of, couple of decades, that was it. I'd made my decision, and everything I made, every decision I made was about that ultimate endpoint, whether that be subjects I made in school, kind of, team sports, trying to have that, end point of joining the military as a pilot at the forefront of my mind. So kind of went through that, typical school process. I was quite lucky when I was 16, 17. I should say from Lincolnshire, so the Air Force was on your back door, and everyone's got a dark seeded past, and mine is that I was unfortunately in the Air Force for a small period. So I was given a scholarship through school, did my A-levels and joined RAF Cranwell to train as an officer and then a pilot, and then unfortunately that was 2010, and then we had the 2010 SDSR, and the military needed to make some tough decisions. They cut, I think, 170 pilots all the way through from still at Cranwell through to about to start an OCU, and I was one of those people. So I was 19 at the time, never been made redundant in my life, pretty big decisions to make, and the airlines were really knocking on the door then. A lot of people went to Cathay Pacific, kind of young boys and girls, on a fully bonded ATPL, living in Hong Kong for 7 years. 32-year-old me looks back at 19-year-old me and, what were you doing, Viv? But I knew I had to give this kind of military flying another crack. So, gave the Navy a call. I was holding at the time on a GR4 squadron, and we had a Navy liaison exchange, and kind of gave them a call, and they were like, you might want to give this Fleet Air On thing a go, and then the rest was history. So yeah, pretty much straight into the Navy, and then flying training through to the Wildcat. So yeah, it's a bit of an odd, twisty, turny road to get there. I just need to have a little stint at Sandhurst, and then I'll complete the set. But yeah, something I've had kind of focused in my mind from a really young age, which helped, I think, definitely going through the process.
Well, sorry to hear about your dad, and I remember that accident, and it was a long time ago. It probably feels like last week to you, I'm sure, Viv, but yeah, I remember that accident, hearing about it, and when we spoke about it before this podcast, and it's I guess it's nice that there was, I guess, your dad sat on your shoulder, seeing you all the way through that training, all those twists and turns, and that you had the resilience even as a very young person to persevere through. I think what's really interesting is with all of these people I speak to on the podcast, very few people have this sort of linear path that takes them, direct from, I'd love to be a pilot, to, there I am sat in the, cockpit of a fighter jet or a helicopter or an airliner. Most people don't have that linear path. There's this, very much up and down path that takes people there. And some people, like you've had an extremely challenging thing to overcome as a young person, the loss of your father. But then I'm sure I'd be extremely proud of you now, mate, and what you've gone on to achieve.
Thank you very much for that. And I think on that point, no matter what anyone's kind of end state is, airline pilot, military pilot, business, whatever they want to do, I think having that kind of up and down route on the way there makes you a stronger and better person, and it means you've experienced things like potentially like failure or having to readjust and reevaluate and move forward, and so it's quite easy to get bogged down in when things don't go your way, but see it as a learning point and take it and make yourself a better person with it, and I think that's key.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Viv. I'm sure a lot of people listening will really appreciate those words. And how about you, Scotty? What was your path like?
Yeah, so really in a similar vein, and a common theme to it seems the vast majority of the guests that you get on here, it's I've been absolutely passionate about flying from a really young age. In fact, as far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a pilot. There was never anything else. I think my mum said she bought me a little ride-on aeroplane when I was about 4 years old, and I said I wanted to be a pilot, and she thought, yeah, all right then, give it a few years, and here we are 30 years later, and I'm doing it. So yeah, from a really young age, really passionate about flying. I always wanted to be an airline pilot, and hadn't ever really considered anything else. And then when I left school back in 2008, I really started to put some effort into that. I actually, me and my parents sat down and we drafted a letter. We sent it, I think, to about 30 or 40 airlines around the world and asking for a sponsorship, because we just couldn't afford the costs of training. It was just going to be impossible. So, and at the time, lots of airlines were offering sponsorships. So we heard back from a few of those airlines, and they said, "Yeah, great. Let us know when you've done your A levels, and we'll have a look at potentially giving you a sponsorship." Now, in 2008, the economy crashed, and unfortunately, then at that point, all bets were off. All airlines really around the world stopped offering sponsorships overnight, and so that was just off the table. And so I switched tack then to the military. I'd been in the Air Cadets actually from a young age, and I could not speak highly enough of that organisation. Absolutely fantastic, and the experiences I had there were great. So I had a little bit of an insight into the military. And for my sins, I then applied to the Air Force, went for selection. And passed all the selection process there, OESC as it is, at Cranwell. But unfortunately, at the medical, they decided my legs were too long. So my legs were a few centimetres too long to join the Air Force. And that was similar to what Viv says there. I think you'll be hard pushed to find someone in this career who hasn't gone through these ups and downs and these hurdles that you've got to get across to try and eventually achieve your dream. So I remember being sat across from this squadron leader at Cranwell, and he sat down with me. He said, "Look, unfortunately, you're outside of the anthrometrics. You're not going to be a pilot." And that was it. I thought, God, another door closed. What am I going to do now? So went home, sat down with my mum and dad, and it was actually my mum who said, "Well, what about the Navy?" And had not even considered that, at all really. But that's when went to the Navy Careers Office. Spoke to them. I already had all my aptitude scores and stuff from my selection with the Air Force, and went for selection with the Navy, and that was it. I was in through the door. And then into flying training, as Viv said, both of us, it took quite a while because of the time that we joined the Navy to eventually get onto the front line, and then finally got my choice of Wildcat. So, but exactly the same, a real sort of turbulent process to get to where you want to be, and I think the key to that is just if you've got that goal, you've got that dream, then me as a working class lad from Burnley, never thought that I'd ever really be able to achieve it, but here I am. So just keep going with it is what I would say.
Excellent. Another amazing story, although both of you managed to pass the Royal Air Force selection process, which I didn't.
Yeah.
There you go. I had at least two attempts.
We're not dispelling these myths about people in the Navy potentially trying to join the Air Force first. I promise some people did directly join the Navy. We'll find some of them at some point. Yeah.
Actually, touching on that, and I said I'd like to chat to you guys about this, but it's been really good. I mean, Instagram didn't exist when I was a kid. I mean, the computers didn't exist when I was a kid. Mobile phones definitely didn't. It was a, dialy phone. No one will have any clue what I'm talking about under the age of 30. But that didn't exist. But what's been really cool to see in the last couple of years, I've really noticed it, is all the social media promo from the Royal Navy in particular has been really, really great. I think it's increased visibility of what's out there, what a life is like in a blue suit, as they say, but in a really positive way, in a really sort of inclusive way. Have you guys noticed that sort of that uptick in promotion?
Yeah, and I think when you look at what the Navy does, and we'll talk about, hopefully later, some are kind of, DITs as we call them from deployments, but we'll take, if you've got an aircraft carrier, 1,000 people, if you're a frigate or destroyer, a couple hundred people, and we'll move them around the world to some incredible places that you will probably never go to again, and be given the opportunity to see some amazing things with some amazing people from all over the UK, the Commonwealth, around the world, and the Navy as an employer, historically for hundreds of years has employed a huge swathe of society from across, the UK, famously the Commonwealth as well. And it's something that I'd say is one of the bits that make you most proud to be part of that Navy, is the fact that, it is an awesome, almost group of people come together with a common cause, in a Pusser's War canoe, moving around to see some incredible areas of the world. It's absolutely made for social media, for Instagram, Twitter or X or whatever you want to use, or Facebook. Some amazing things, and we've got some incredible stories to tell throughout pretty much the entire Royal Navy.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think the key thing is, as I said there, I looked at joining the Air Force. Viv joined the Air Force. I think, unfortunately, the Navy is not going to be the first thing that people tend to think about when they want to become a pilot. Right. But actually, the Navy's really got something to offer there. Taking and again, we'll talk about it later on, I'm sure, but taking a helicopter on the back of a Navy ship and traveling around the world, and that's your helicopter, for the 7 months that you're on there or whatever, is just, is the best feeling in the world. So actually, the Navy now has a platform in Instagram, Facebook, social media to get the word out there, actually, that it's got that little niche that the Air Force doesn't have.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember having been unsuccessful with my Air Force applications, going to the Admiralty interview board, as it's called, for the Royal Navy, and just feeling at home. That's how I felt. And this is no slight on the Royal Air Force at all. Incredible organisation. I've got lots of mates, as you guys will as well, that fly for the Royal Air Force and the British Army. But it's I just felt at home in the Navy. And I think that phrase I've seen on social media, forgive me if I got this not entirely correct, but I was born in, for example, as you said, Scott Burnley, but I was made in the Royal Navy. And I've often said to people, and even my wife, a lot, I don't know if I was put a percentage on it, but it'd be more than 50% of who I've become and what I've been able to go on and do and help other people is because of the Royal Navy. And because of the people that I met, and the people that shaped me who I was. I remember someone saying when I first joined, I was like, well, everyone's taking a mickey out of me, this is all a bit hard. They were like, listen, mate, you want to start worrying when people stop taking a mickey out of you.
That's true.
And I was like, and that's so true. But that's sort of chopping the edges off you, isn't it? It develops you into who you are. Has that been your experience, guys?
Yeah, and I think by the unique nature of how we deploy, kind of as small units, pretty much all my experience is frigates and destroyers, so a couple hundred people for 6 to 7 or 8 months away. You form some very close bonds with people and become very close friends with them. And one of those feelings of you turn up to a random officer's mess or wardroom or course somewhere, and there's someone you recognise from across the room from a previous point, and you're like, shipmate, you all right? Do you and then you start regaling these stories from this deployment in 2000 and whatever, and actually next thing you know, you're right back there, and you form these really close kind of bonds and friendships with these people by the sheer nature that you're trapped not trapped, you're working in a metal box in theory for 7 months, clearly with run ashores places, but you form these really tight knit friendships, which I've got some good friends in the Air Force and in the Army, and particularly the Army Air Corps, and I think that's one thing that they all comment on, is kind of that kind of camaraderie of the Fleet Air Arm and of the Navy itself.
Yeah. And you guys have already been referencing the next thing I wanted to chat about. So, Scotty, maybe you can tell us a bit about what, firstly, what the Wildcat Helicopter is, and then what embarked ops means, because there'll be listeners out here who don't really know what that means. So perhaps you can give us a bit of a lowdown on that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I can see I've got a Wildcat sitting on the sitting on my cabinet behind me for those watching on YouTube. So that's the Wildcat helicopter.
It's not made out of wood and about 6 inches long.
It is. Yeah, it is actually. Yeah. So that's the Wildcat. The Wildcat is the Navy's multi-role helicopter, and what multi-role means is, what it says on the tin. We can do a bit of everything really. Whereas your other helicopters, you've got the Merlin, for example. The Grey Merlin will focus on the anti-submarine warfare, and the specialist very good at that. You've got the Green Merlin, which will do troop carrying and that sort of thing. We are multi-role. However, having said that, our bread and butter is in anti-surface warfare. So what we're really good at is searching for, finding, and ultimately sinking enemy ships. If required. That's what our absolute bread and butter is. And we're really coming back into our own now in that sense, because over the last few years we've had a couple of missiles come into service, which gives us back that sort of hard kill capability that we haven't really had for the last, since the days of the Lynx. So that's our primary role. Maritime attack is what we do, but also all the secondary roles that we've got. So humanitarian relief is something that we tend to get involved in quite heavily. We've done a lot of work out in the Caribbean with disaster relief after hurricanes. We do a lot of counter narcotics. Again, we're a really good platform for that because of the sensors that we've got on the aircraft. So the radar is absolutely phenomenal, as is the camera that we've got on there. And so our ability to find small vessels, which generally drug smugglers are, is really good. So I would say what I generally say to people when they say, what's the difference between the helicopters that the Navy fly? I say the Wildcat is the Ferrari of the skies, and the Merlin is the Ford Transit van of the skies. So
they won't thank you for that.
No, there'll be people knocking on his door from the Merlin world. But I think Scott makes a really good point there, and it links into kind of the uniqueness of the fleet air and embarked ops, if you will. So first of all, as Scott alluded to, then our bread and butter is maritime strike, maritime attack as a helicopter platform. Go out, find, fix the enemy, track it, and ultimately prosecute it if required, utilizing a variety of weapons. From we carry Royal Marine snipers in that counter narcotics role that Scotty talks about. We can have 50 caliber M2M machine gun fit to the side of the aircraft. We can carry Stingray torpedoes for an ASW platform, and then ultimately the teeth of Wildcat now. So your Martlet, which is a kind of a small what we call fast inshore attack craft. So think kind of armored speedboat, potentially carrying missiles or torpedoes to attack you or others. And then up to a new missile coming online now, so Sea Venom, which is a complex kind of anti-corvette warship, if you will, size weapon. And and Scott and I both work in the squadron where we teach people how to fly and, as you say, ultimately fight that aircraft. And to paint a picture of some of the uniqueness of embarked ops is you may be launching on what we call MCON silent dark ops. So essentially launch from the ship, very few lights, no radios, radar in a limited mode, go out, find a contact 100 miles ahead of mum, which is what we call your own ship, track the target without them seeing you, and then ultimately, if required, prosecute that target, hopefully without them even knowing you're there. And that's where kind of the skill of, or one of the unique areas of embarked ops is that also where you've launched from is moving, and you need to kind of control both parts of that fight, if you will. That's our bread and butter. And as you say, we also have to be, because we're potentially the only helicopter in the task group or on the ship, is being able to keep our hand in things like search and rescue or anti-submarine warfare, or focusing on counter narcotics, or focusing on search and rescue. And so those are kind of those secondary roles that play into our skill set alongside that maritime strike, maritime attack mentality as a crew, really.
I'm just listening to you chatting about that, Viv. That's the sort of thing that makes me want to get signed up to the Royal Navy again and go and get back in a helicopter and go flying. I actually did. I don't know if they still do this. Do they still do IST, initial C term, at Dartmouth?
Yeah, they keep changing it around. I think when me and Viv went through officer training, I did 10 weeks on ocean. IFT it was then, initial fleet time.
Right.
I think they do a little bit less time at sea now, but certainly that a few weeks sort of maritime acquaint on a ship. Yeah.
Yeah, I did mine on HMS Coventry, which is I don't know what happened to HMS Coventry. I don't think it exists anymore. I don't know.
No,
This is how old I am.
Long gone, I think, Andrew.
Yeah,
I know, and it's like, and the Sea Harrier back there. That's like it's a museum piece. I keep seeing them popping up for sale.
Yeah, you could probably go glamping in one or something like that. That's what tends to happen nowadays.
Well, I know there's some people that have flown them on the sort of civvy register. This guy out in the States, but I mean, I am that old that what I flew was a museum piece, and the ships I served on no longer exist. Which is, it's a bit sad, isn't it?
No comment. No comment.
But talking about embarked ops, what would you say is some of the most challenging aspects of being embarked, sort of as a pilot, and you're there with an observer as well? It'd be nice to hear about what the observer role is on the Wildcat Helicopter. But what are some of the most challenging aspects as a crew, pilot and observer, and what about sort of more general terms would you say?
So I'd say caveat of what is most challenging is also most rewarding a lot of the time. Yeah. So, you are, particularly in the world we operate in as Wildcat aircrew, you're one pilot, one observer, and that's it. You are gone with an aircraft, as Scott says, around the world for potentially up to 9 months. So you've got to be equipped to deal with everything that can be thrown at you. And fundamentally, each almost hour embarked can be different. I remember getting airborne in the South China Sea and kind of pushing ahead, looking at what's out there, came back in, it's like, right, change of intentions, you now have to do a medevac. We need to medevac someone to HMS Queen Elizabeth, who we're in the task group with. Right, come back now. Okay, we actually now need to move someone about the task group, and then you can get back to your primary job, which is, finding and tracking ships out there. So there's such a variety of what you can be asked to do. And when people go through flying training, we talk about this kind of cassette in, cassette out. So, as you move into a phase of flying, put that, instrument flying cassette in, right? You're now flying, thinking about deck landing, put that cassette in, and you've got to be able to do that really, really quickly. Fundamentally as well, you're operating, on your own, and sometimes, without connectivity back to the squadron, you might be in a restricted MCON, so a mission control, depending on what operation you're on. So you've got to be able to solve a lot of your problems as a pair, and with the kind of the rest of the ops focused people on board the ship. So your warfare officers on there as well, which can be quite difficult. And I think the main thing to talk about really is the fact that the place you took off from is very rarely in the place you left it, and is very rarely still. So every time you come back from a sortie, you may have, done something relatively kind of low arousal, and suddenly you're going to have to switch back on when you're alongside the 17-foot flight deck of a 23 that's pitching and rolling on a dark night, because it's always a dark night somehow. I don't think I've seen the moon when I've been embarked for about 4 years. I don't know why. Yeah, but they are the most challenging, and operating with your Oppo as an observer and with a group of 8 engineers, so quite a small outfit, and a LAC, so leading aircraft controller, kind of think sort of along the lines of air traffic control, but kind of more tactical based rather than safety based as well. You've got to solve those problems, and they need solving quickly. So it's quite a rewarding position to be deployed as a pilot or an observer as well, and in fact anywhere within the Navy, I would say.
And you'll probably echo those similar things, I'm guessing, Scotty, but is there anything else that you found particularly challenging?
Yeah, I echo everything Viv said there. I think the one thing with the Navy is we traditionally do quite long, lengthy deployments away from home as well. So I think the challenge of being away from family, is always there. I did, a 7-month deployment back in 2018, 2019 over Christmas, and that's challenging for the guys away, but probably more so actually for the people you're leaving at home as well. So, and it's not just you who's struggling with that. As Viv mentioned there, when we go away, we have a team of engineers that we manage as well, and we get really close to that team. But you've also got to remember that they're potentially struggling as well, being away from family. So that's something to watch. I think the one thing I would say there, just to build on what Viv has said, I think the sort of key difference with the way we do it is specifically as naval aviators, is we're entirely autonomous when we go away. So it's quite often that we'll be delivering the Met brief on board, for example. I think that's the bit that people, don't quite understand. I remember once we were going through the Strait of the Gibraltar Straits onto deployment, and I was stood in front of the captain. I'd just given the Met brief, and I said, Mom, blue, gin clear. There's going to be no issues getting into Gibraltar. And after about 30 seconds, I just heard the foghorn go off. And then I was quickly invited to the captain's cabin for a one-way discussion on that one. But yeah, I think that's the sort of the challenges that you've got, just operating entirely autonomously and doing the whole thing yourself. Ops, doing flight plans, everything. The whole thing is managed by you, and like you say, your observer as well. Certainly working together as a team.
Yeah, so it's quite a small team. It's a very different environment to an aircraft carrier that I served on, albeit much smaller than the Queen Elizabeth class of carrier. But of course, as a squadron, we had things to do, and there were things to organise, and missions to plan, and missions to debrief. But there were other teams doing the Met, because there were too many pilots on the boat to do that. There were other teams doing everything else. But it seems that on that small ship, everyone's mucking in, and it's sort of not quite jack of all trades, but you've got to be able to turn your hand to anything. But I find that really good fun. But I'm sure it brings a lot of challenges as well. And as you said, looking after a team of other people on the ship as well that you're responsible for. In good times and tough times, and I've been there as well. And how you manage that, because you say people at home they're finding it tough. I helped a young sailor who's really struggling with being away, and how we manage that process to look after them. It's really, really important. And actually, I think that was one of the key things I noticed on joining the Royal Navy, is you're joining as an officer first, and you're there to look after people, make sure the job gets done, and then as a pilot second. But that, again, as I now have spent longer out of the Navy, I was only in for half a dog's watch, as my friends keep telling me. As I exited out of the Navy, all of those skills in looking after people are things that I've taken forward in life, been really, really beneficial. But guys, I want to talk about the most sort of exciting part of this podcast to me, which is to get stuck into the display side of the Wildcat, because the operational side is amazing. And interestingly, I learned that you weren't just going, hey, we're going to be the display pilots for the Wildcat, but you're still training people at the same time. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about how it came to be that you guys got to fire up the Wildcat display, because it had been a few years since any Navy helicopters had displayed that way, and also this sort of unique window on displays for the public, but actually a primary role still being training people at the same time, which sounds pretty nails. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we've historically we've had a display team. This is the 20th year of the Black Cats. If we go back to its start, before that we had the Lynx pair with the Lynx Mark III, and then Black Cat started Lynx Mark III, Mark 8, and into Wildcat. Now, as we transitioned to Wildcat, kind of in the early part of the 2010s, we still had that pairs Black Cats display with Wildcat, and then as we got busier and busier as a force, as Lynx drew down and Wildcat stood up, that kind of moved into a solo display, because airframes were required on ops, and then we had about a 7-year gap initially planned of solo displays only. So Scott did a lot of work last year with another pilot to try and bring that pairs display back, and they did all the hard work. And I won't steal his sandwiches on what they did, but unfortunately, due to kind of ongoing ops and requirements of the aircraft, the decision was made to delay that return to pairs display by a year. Which then, thankfully for me, meant that I could step into the breach and work with, and Scott and I could work together to bring that pairs display back into the fold, to bring it back to the public. That said, you say we are primary QHIs, as they're called, so qualified helicopter instructors, there to teach new pilots and sometimes observers how to fly and fight the aircraft from land, at sea, day, night, or weather, and that has to be our primary role. So a bit unique compared to potentially what people will see with the Red Arrows or with the Typhoon display team, where that's their sole job and their focus entirely on that. we had times where, you'd go into one of those early sorties, Scott and I working out, kind of, getting torn apart in the debrief, and then I had to walk out of there and go and brief with a student to go and teach them kind of auto rotation or something like that, kind of trying to recover from my own debrief, and then straight into teaching again. And that's part of the joy of the Navy. Kind of goes back to that embarked ops piece. What we're all so focused on is being able to kind of switch between stuff quickly to maximize output as a group of individuals.
Wow. And so what would you say, Scott, have been the most challenging aspects, particularly at the beginning of getting that display together? Because you're full-time qualified helicopter instructors, whilst learning how to, and presumably creating what the display was going to look like. What was your experience of that, Scott?
Yeah, so like Viv says, back in 2013, a couple of years ago now, we decided that we'd try and bring back this pairs display that hadn't been done since 2016. Actually, from the day I joined the Wildcat Force, I'd always wanted to be a display pilot and fly for the Black Cats. I remember seeing the Black Cats display when I was a kid, and harping back to what we said at the beginning, it was one of those things that just ignited that passion for flying for me. So I'd always really wanted to do it. So when I got eventually to 825 and I was instructing, I was really determined that, right, we're going to bring this back. Now, trying to bring a pairs display back when there hasn't been one for 7 years was absolutely challenging, probably the most challenging thing in my career so far. Generally, I would say back in the day, not that long ago, but when the pairs display was well established, you would have a display pilot, and then a new display pilot would join for the first season. The next season they would take over as lead, and then somebody new would join. So you'd always have that sort of common
handover.
Yeah, exactly, handover. But we didn't have that. So myself and Jim Carver, who was the other display pilot previous season, we had to work up together, and neither of us having flown a pairs display. Both of us had done a little bit of solo display flying, but as you can probably appreciate, the two things are entirely different. And flying a pairs display when you're in close proximity to another person, is an entirely different kettle of fish. So we had to draw, as we do in the military, and we're quite good at, and you'll be aware, just using the team that you've got and using the expertise that you've got available to you. We had to draw on all that experience. Luckily, we had a couple of pilots on the force who had done the pairs display back in the day, and so they got on board and they did all the workup and the training with us, and eventually we got there. But I'm actually quite passionate about the Black Cats, and like I say, not only because it's something I always wanted to do, I think it's really important from a Navy perspective as well. Getting the Navy out there, letting people know what we do, and actually it's a real honor to be given that to be given that responsibility. And I'm sure Viv will say the same. To be traveling around the country, going to these air shows, has been a real privilege, and to talk to these young people who you can see have got that passion that you had when you were a kid, and you can see the naval aviators of the future, in front of you. I've absolutely loved every second of it.
Yeah, what have been the most challenging parts of actually flying the display? Because when I saw you guys, I was stood there. I was actually going to go and catch up with some friends of the Red Arrows that were in the tent next door, where they were hosting people, as they do very, very well. And I stood there and I saw you guys literally right in front of me doing some sort of vertical drop.
Nose
and
over.
Crossing over each other. Nose over, there you go. Yeah. See, I'd have made a terrible display pilot. Yeah, the big drop, the one where you go wee,
that one. Yeah.
and then passing each other as well, which looked terrifying, but obviously all under total control. But what are the most challenging aspects of those types of manoeuvres and actually doing it safely in front of the public?
So I think one thing you're always at a disadvantage with as a helicopter display team is you have neither afterburners, noise, or the ability to pull 9G, which sets the jets up for success. And therefore, you've got to think a little bit out the box and almost bring a sense of jeopardy in how you design the display, because you need to create illusions that the aircraft are maybe closer than they are. Now we are pretty close to each other. We're about one rotor span apart through a lot of the display, so kind of 20 to 30 feet between us. A lot of times crossing with a kind of crossing speed of 250 knots, quite close to each other. So you need to design that display so it's both safe, but also almost has that sense of jeopardy in how you design it. And then also bring in some of the traits of helicopter, so being able to hover, being able to move backwards, being able to kind of rotate around each other, kind of similar to the Sea Harrier. It's not just helicopters that can hover, and the F-35 gives it a good go. But we used to like to joke that when you're watching the Typhoon display team or the Red Arrows, you can't talk to your oppo about it because it's so loud, whereas at least with us, you can appreciate and talk to your friend next to you about, oh, isn't that good? And you can hear each other.
Exactly.
And whilst you're stood in the queue for the ice cream or something at RIAT. But, bringing that display, I remember Scott and I locked ourselves in a room and, got some whiteboard pens and kind of very Central Flying School style. I had 4 colours, got ourselves set up and, we designed this display, and by the end of it looked kind of like, the ramblings of a mad professor. And we're like, okay, let's kind of dial back what we think's possible, chat to some of the more experienced people. And we were pretty confident, actually, by then. We had something, unique that hadn't been done in the Black Cats before, particularly with a couple of our manoeuvres. And then it was just about going out and practicing them. And one of the things that's really kind of plays to a bit of the strengths of, go back to that embarked ops, is that we're very used to deploying with a single person. So learning all about them, when they're having a good day, when they're having a bad day, kind of what their strengths, weaknesses are, and playing off each other. And so in those early days, there are some of the maneuvers where Scott and I would fly them very subtly differently, but we can't afford to do that. So we'll go up together just in a single aircraft to go, oh, you fly it, with this slight control input different to me, I do this, right, okay, let's now move that together so that we are seamless when we are in front of the crowd. And that was a really rewarding process, to see as starting off, some of these maneuvers being quite far apart, then moving further in. And I remember, on the sun, we're always talking to each other during the display, and on the taxi back in, we're always debriefing ourselves. And I remember coming out the first 2 maneuvers of the Sunday display at RIAT, which was kind of a pairs 360-degree wing over into a maneuver where Scott essentially changes, so comes or moves around the outside of myself and then takes the lead into the next one. And so I'm blind to Scott for a lot of it. I have to kind of trust what he's going to do. And he was just in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And I thought to myself, right, we're on here. This is slick so far. Don't mess
Thanks,
it up.
Man.
Dave.
So the first time he's ever said anything nice about me.
Yeah, you have to edit that bit out. I'll never do that again. But I thought, right, we're on. And it's been really rewarding to bring that back and hopefully have it in a position where that's it now. It's back, and the next crew have been kind of highlighted how they're going to do it and go from there. And the aim is to have that pairs display back for the public this year because of, like Scott said, it's just that being out on the ground and the benefit again of helicopters, we can land pretty close to the display site. So we land, quick drink of water, and then we're straight on to meet the boys and girls of the public, and kind of you get that straight away feedback of what they thought, and wow, what's it like, and whereas the Red Arrows might have to go and land 60 miles away, we can be there, get feedback from the crowd pretty quick. I thought you were out here or out there, but yeah, it's so rewarding, and as Scott says, meeting those people and ultimately realizing that somehow these people kind of look at what you're doing and think, wow, I want to be like that, which I did not have any idea it would be like. Young boys and girls asking for your autograph, and I was thinking, oh, my signature looks like it's done by a 3-year-old. I'm going to have to try and make this look better. So people come over saying, oh, I'm joining the Navy because I followed you on Instagram, or I saw some of the videos of the Black Cats, and I just thought, I want to be a pilot and want to be a Wildcat pilot. It's pretty rewarding, and I'll be honest, it's the part of the job I didn't really prepare myself for, but it's the bit that I enjoyed the most, and I'm sure Scott's pretty similar.
Yeah, no, I entirely agree. And I always say to people when they say which bit of being a display pilot do you enjoy, and actually, displaying in front of thousands of people gives you a real buzz, and it's great. But actually, for me, like Viv says there's nothing quite like those little conversations that you have when you stood on the you stood on the stand there, and actually you get these little boys and girls coming up to you like, wow, I want to be a pilot one day. Never did I think that little old Scott from Burnley would be the person that people would be looking up to. But yeah, no, it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's,
Yeah.
Andrew, just it's probably worth me just quickly explaining, because Viv spoke a little bit there about how the display works, but it's probably interesting for people, because I had no idea before I got into it, just exactly how that works. And so one pilot will always fly a display, and then the other pilot will work to them. So you have a number one who leads the display, which for this season was Viv, and then number two will slot in around them. So Viv flies his own display effectively, and then I just sort of slot in and around him. Yeah, exactly. It's terrifying, really.
Like a dance partner.
Yeah,
really.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I can't dance, so. Yeah. So that's
can't fly either, to be honest, Scott. So
I'm a better flyer than I am a dancer. So
that's good to hear. But you were still in. What I can't get over is that you guys were still instructing students on the way. So you do.
Yeah.
I know. Were you doing a sort of an instructional flight on the way to the display or after the display, or
so
how did it work?
Yeah, a really good example of this was, so we were doing Bournemouth Air Festival, which was awesome. It's a seaside town, so it's over the water, so it's our bread and butter. It's an awesome place. People are amazing there, and we had a course of students go through at the time, and they needed an instrument flying safety check before they then went on to their final kind of embarked warfighting phase. So Scott and I went down there with the aircraft in the morning. Students drove to meet us at Bournemouth Airport. We went and did a display site recce and a fly pass. So we did a practice display. Essentially, all display areas will have some markers, denoting what we call an A and a B axis. And your entire display is based around these markers, no matter what the wind is, which is part of the difficult bit of a helicopter display. So we went through a full run through, debriefed ourselves. Okay, wind is here, so we're going to modify, or we're going to adjust how we're going to fly specific maneuvers come the day of the races. Then we did the opening fly pass of the Bournemouth Air Festival, and then we landed back on. I got from the right-hand seat into the left-hand seat and then took a student on an IF safety check. So you've just gone from dynamically flying a helicopter, 90 degrees nose down, 90 degrees angle of bank, 20 foot away from another helicopter. And now you're flying instrument landing approaches, you're flying kind of low-level instrument flying, you're doing coordinated turns, kind of, IF or instrument flying. It's about as far away from that as possible, trying to assess that student to make sure they're safe, whilst putting in emergencies, denying them systems. And then we landed back on, shut the aircraft down, quick bit of scran, and then we were up for our first display. So, you kind of trying to do what you can, but really harking back to the fact that our primary job as an instructor. And what an awesome opportunity for those students who are now qualified frontline aircrew. They're now on the frontline squadron, 815 Naval Air Squadron, to go, I was involved with Bournemouth Air Festival. I did some of this training, not just from Yeovilton, but at a deployed location, so I can apply those skills I've learned back at Yeovilton somewhere else. So there's some real benefits of doing instructional there. It just means you have to work pretty hard as a display pilot and an instructor to, remember what you're doing at the right time and remember whose report you're writing when. But ultimately really rewarding as well.
Sounds chaotic in my brain because I'm not very good at things like that, but it sounds like you guys have I guess it's doing the Royal Navy's training proud as well, because I think those that are not in the forces don't understand the level of and this is all banter aside for being chaotic, the level of professionalism that all different military personnel have in all different branches and all different roles. But obviously we can only speak from the sort of flying side of it, but that level of professionalism and those standards and that resilience to keep going, I think only those that have done it actually understand what that's like, because it's something that it's difficult to comprehend for people outside of having done that career. But we're not just joining the forces and having a laugh. We're joining the forces and extremely professional, and obviously displaying to the public is great because it gets people enjoyed in it, but it's not taking anything away from the day-to-day job. Obviously, it's not just you guys flying the display. There's a whole team as well looking after the aircraft and supporting you. So I'm sure you'd like to maybe give a bit of a mention to the team of engineers and anyone else out there. Is anyone particularly you'd like to mention?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Andrew. I think it would be remiss of us not to mention our team of engineers. They've been absolutely outstanding this season, and I would absolutely be able to say without doubt we wouldn't have achieved we wouldn't have achieved anything without them. And ultimately, they're volunteers as well, so they're putting their, they're working weekends every time we're off, disappearing off to do these air shows. They're coming along with us, and representing the Royal Navy absolutely, fantastically at these events. Quite often, if people do want to see the Black Cats in future, then pop and see us at your local air show. But the people generally that you speak to on the stand are our engineers. So they're there working the aircraft, and then they're stood on the stands to actually tell people that it's not all about being a pilot. There's lots of careers out there in the military, in the Navy, that exciting, fantastic opportunities that people can get involved in, and that's just another example, another avenue that people can go down. But yeah, certainly a huge shout out to our team of engineers for this year. They've been brilliant.
Yeah, I've moved. Obviously, it's been years and years since I left the Royal Navy, but I still see, particularly on places like LinkedIn, how people are getting on, whether they were pilots or engineers or other supporting staff in the military. And without fail, they've all gone on to do amazing things. Everyone's gone on to do something. I think, again, it's all of those skills and tool set that you get as a member of the armed forces, but a member of the Navy, where you're forced to be with people, you're forced to make it work. People seem to go on to do amazing things. Everyone you see, like, wow, look, that's amazing. Great for them. So yeah. So what's next then, guys? What's the what's coming up next for each of you?
We're just both coming towards the end of our instructional tour on 825, having extended a bit on there for us to kind of keep teaching and use some of those skills we've learned, throughout our time on the front line and instructing. For myself, it's a fairly big move now, so we are moving out to America. So I was lucky enough this year to be selected to go to the United States Naval Test Pilot School for my next kind of job. So that's essentially cool. Going to go out and learn that I know absolutely nothing about helicopters or flying or aerodynamics. So, I think back to, when you do science at school and you might do, physics at GCSE and you learn one thing and then you get to A level and they go, what we taught you is complete rubbish. But it was the simplest way we could do it to you. And I'm in the middle of the kind of pre-course learning now, and I'm pretty confident I know absolutely nothing about how helicopters work. It's just witchcraft and pixie dust, I think, at the minute. So yeah, off out there for a year or so, and then back to Boscombe down to work as a test pilot for a few years, and during that, hopefully keep the instructing going, kind of on Wildcat, whilst also working in the test and evaluation world. So. Yeah, looking forward to it. A bit of apprehension, but moving the family across the world, but it'll be good fun. And looking forward to kind of the reason we do this job is you're always learning. The second you stop learning, probably find another job. Really, I would say, particularly in flying. So what an opportunity to learn, a load more about fixed wing helicopters. All sorts of things, kind of how they work and what we can do with them to maximise their effectiveness, if you will.
Fantastic. Well, one of my close friends, and I think you've heard this episode, Viv, I don't know if you have, Scotty, but I spoke to Nathan Gray, who was the lead test pilot on the F-35, and Nathan, I remember going to see him at Pax River. Is that where you're going?
It is, yeah. Pax River, yeah.
And I went to his house, stayed over, and he said, so this week I've basically had to learn how to fly an F-16, but not just learn how to fly it. I've never flown it. I'm not going to get taught how to fly it. I just have to go and fly it. And I have to not just do that, but write a test program for this new system of some description, fly the test program, debrief the test program with the engineers, and then see what the outcome was. And I've got 5 days to do all of that. And I was like, so you've never flown an F-16, but I need to I need to know all the checklists. I need to know everything. So that's what awaits. I mean, it sounded amazing, but it also sounded extremely stressful.
Yeah, I think
so. You're obviously very talented, Viv. That must be it.
Oh, come on.
Or extremely lucky.
No, there's some pretty big holes in the nets that I've managed to swim through for now. But everyone I speak to that's been out there or like has done something similar, says, "Oh, your wife and daughter are going to love it out there," and I'm like, and me, and they're like, "Oh, you'll be pretty busy. You may get a chance to enjoy it out there." But yeah, really looking forward to, like I say, a new opportunity, something exciting, and see what comes of it. So just throw myself into that over the next job, definitely.
Amazing. Sounds awesome. How about you, Scotty? What's happening?
Yeah, so I'm making a pretty big change soon as well, to be honest. So if you remember back to the start of the podcast when I said right at the beginning what I wanted to do is, I wanted to be an airline pilot when I was younger. So my plan is actually probably to leave the Navy in the next 18 months or so to pursue a career in the airlines. So I certainly have taken the long route to that. But it feels like I'm coming full circle. So it feels quite nice, actually. I'm looking back, I am absolutely glad I've done it the way I have. And actually, I think fate, always has a big part to play in these things. And actually joining the military was the right thing for me. I've been in the Navy for 15 years now, and I've had some incredible experiences, both on the ground and in the air. Traveled around the world and seen some amazing things. But because what I always wanted to do was be an airline pilot. I think it's just that itch that I need to scratch. And so I'm starting off on that route now. So I think I'll be giving you a call soon, actually. For a bit of
to get yourself a wingman.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a bit of promotion there in the background.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll leave you to this.
So I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, it's a well-trodden path for people to serve their time in the forces and then to move on to airline flying and other things. And for some people to spend a full career in the military, as many of my friends are still in the armed forces and having a fantastic time. Guys, before we leave, I meant to bring this in earlier, but I've got a winging it question to ask you, which is our random question. The good news is you don't have to answer it yourself because the other person's going to answer it for you. The bad news is the question is, what is your most annoying habit? So Viv, you have to tell Scott what his is, and Scott, you have to tell Viv what his most annoying habit is. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I don't need to think about this one. It's pretty obvious. I will caveat this with Scott's most annoying habit is probably one of the best, it leads to some great stories, which is Scott can sniff out a karaoke situation from about 30,000 miles away. I have heard Scott sing Elvis Presley a million times, and he's frustratingly good at it as well. And he'll sing some karaoke. So, have you heard how good he is? I'm like, I have, yes. Multiple times. This
means that Scott now needs to sing Elvis Presley on the podcast.
Well, exactly. That's what I've done.
Don't tempt me, Andrew. Don't tempt me.
No. And the problem is that normally leads me, as a display formation into following into some karaoke, and I unfortunately have a deadly triple threat of lack of talent, over ambition, and overconfidence when it comes to karaoke.
That's me. That's me.
So yeah, Scott's ability to sniff out some karaoke is both one of the most frustrating, but also one of the funniest bits as well.
Excellent. And what's Viv's then, Scotty?
Well, do you know what? And this is God's honest truth. Before Viv said that, I was thinking it's actually Viv's inability to back me up on the karaoke.
Yeah.
So, because as he says, I completely agree. It's definitely a confidence outweighing ability situation. Yeah. And I get up there to wow the crowds with my well-trodden Elvis Presley rendition, and he comes and joins me. And unfortunately, it doesn't go well. So Viv's inability to be able to help me on the karaoke is mine.
Well, that sounds like the three of us will have to get together for karaoke somewhere. Japan's my favourite. I think I've spoken about this before. Every time I walk into this particular place in Japan, this lady, I don't know how old she is, but she's probably a 60-ish year old lady who runs the bar. Every time she sees me, even if it's been 3 years since I've been there, she points at me and she goes, "Grease Megamix." And it's not because of my Greek heritage. She just wants to sing Grease Megamix with me.
Yeah.
I don't know how she remembers me, but every time. And we go and do a duet of Grease Megamix.
You must be good then if she remembers you. I think my problem is whenever I look at the list, I appear to discount every song that's shorter than about 6.5, 7 minutes. And showmanship will only get you so far. It's about 45 seconds, and then you've got to sit out the next 6 minutes of this, and you're just along for the ride at that point. And Scott's there trying his hardest to help me at this point. It's always fun. It's always good fun.
Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today, and it's been amazing to hear not just about what life is like on the front line of a Wildcat Helicopter Squadron, which sounds amazing. And if anyone's listening out there and is thinking about getting into a career in aviation, do not do what we did and only think of one of the Armed Forces wings to start with. Look at all of them, the Army, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, because there's some amazing opportunities. And I know the three of us immensely enjoyed our time in the Royal Navy. So thanks for giving us a window into that. And also, again, huge congratulations. I meant to mention we were talking about the display. Can you remind me, guys, again, what the name of the sword trophy was at RIAT?
Yeah, so that was the Steedman Sword for the best British flying display.
Amazing and thoroughly well deserved. And the display will be back next year, will it, guys? Has that been set in stone yet?
Absolutely, yeah, that's the plan. We're still to finalise exactly which shows we're doing, but it's looking like another busy season again. So if people keep their eye on our Facebook page, then we'll announce it shortly, I'm sure.
And so what would that Facebook page be? Just the Black Cats?
Yeah, the Royal Navy Black Cats. And our
Royal Navy Black Cats.
and our Twitter as well. Yeah, Royal Navy Black Cats.
Excellent. Any final words of mention or words of inspiration you'd like to give out to people, guys?
I just think, if you are even considering a small amount a job in the military, and that can be absolutely any job, they all have their pros, their cons, as every job does. Reach out and talk to people, go speak to your local armed forces recruiter. The joys of social media now, just reach out and send a direct message to someone and ask for an opinion on what life is like. Try and get that insight into the role you're into. And I promise you, if you go for it, you will have a great time. You'll learn some awesome skills. You will have some real good fun. You'll make some mates for life. And like you said earlier, Andrew, some people will do a couple of years in the military. Some people will do 40 years. And ultimately, we need all those people, whether they do 1 year, 2 year or 40 years. They all bring something to the party. And fundamentally, if they then leave and go work for industry, or that then still feeds back into helping the military. So don't be put off by this thought that you don't want to do a job for 20, 30 years. You may join and decide you do, but get out there, look on the Royal Navy website, look on the Air Force website or the Army website, depending on what role you want, and just find as much information you can. Start the application, and you can always decide it's not for you later. But it's all about taking that first step. The amount of people that we spoke to that were like, oh, I don't know whether I'm good enough to be a pilot. And, I'm hoping 5 minutes with Scott and I at an air show stand will realise that if these two can do it, literally anyone can do it. So get your application in and almost demyth that, this thing is unachievable, whatever role that be. It just start the process, see where you are, and speak to people, get as much information as you can.
100%.
And I would just say the same sort of thing, as Viv says, if I can do it, then absolutely anyone can. And if somebody's sat out there, with that passion for flying that we've all got, but actually feeling overwhelmed with it all, which was certainly the case with me, and it often felt like that sort of unachievable aim. Just keep going with it. It would be my advice, because if your passion is there, then you'll absolutely get there. Just keep on going.
Brilliant. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Really appreciate it. Wishing you the very best of luck with your new endeavours. Sounds very exciting on both your parts. So yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks Andrew.
Thank you.